Good afternoon. I am Stephen Morris, banking editor of the Financial Times, and I'm here this afternoon to talk to Minister Guy Opperman, the Minister for Pensions and Financial Inclusion at the Department for Work and Pensions in the UK. And our discussion today will explore the question, can politicians and regulators play a greater role in making finance more inclusive? And I think after the experience of the country, over the last 18 months during the coronavirus crisis, this is a topic that's as important as ever. So, Minister, I would like to introduce you. Thank you. There you are. And just open up the initial question to you for some early thoughts. Can politicians and regulators play a greater role in making finance more inclusive? Presumably you think so, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about why.
So I think 110% yes, and I think that starts from the lowest parish councillor, county councillor, district councillor, up to individual members of parliament, regional mayors and individual ministers. So I had plenty of normal jobs before I was elected in 2010. I was a lawyer, I ran a business, I ran a couple of charities, and I was a very fat steeplechase jockey. And I then, in 2010, when I was elected, virtually the first surgery I had was with a business that was really struggling with access to finance in my constituency in Hexham. And my football team was sponsored by Wonga, wasn't a very good football team as well. And more particularly, there was a massive issue with payday lending, loan sharks, and no access to credit. There was no credit union in any real terms throughout the community, and all my banks were shutting. Certainly in rural Northumberland, I represent the largest constituency in England, and banks were closing hand over fist. So we set about trying to do something about that. So we set up the Northumberland Community Bank, which is the fastest growing bank in Northumberland and in the Northeast. I also set up a bank called Atom Bank, which I backed with my own money, and I was a founder member of that. Both banks are effectively online, although the Northumberland Community Bank has access to an office in Ashington, which is the most deprived part of Northumberland. And we made it our mission from 2010 through to about 2017, when I got this job, to bring savings and loans and access to finance to the wider Northeast community, which is still the area with the highest unemployment, worst health outcomes, highest public sector numbers, and various other metrics that are not very good on an ongoing basis. And I genuinely believe we made a difference there. And so when I was a backbencher and then I was a whip, I was very much pressuring David Cameron and Theresa May to get somebody who was interested in financial inclusion, have a proper financial inclusion minister, and very much made the case, particularly to Theresa, when I was one of her whips, that this was something that we should be doing. And so she very kindly asked me to be the Minister for Pensions, but also the first Minister for Financial Inclusion. And we work very, very much hand in glove with Treasury, particularly my colleague John Glenn, who you'll know very well. We created the Financial Inclusion Task Force and made very sure that over the last 3 to 4 years, that we have driven forward policies that create greater access to all aspects of finance, things that we all take for granted, whether that's access to savings, to loans, to low-cost credit. We've taken on mid and high-cost credit and regulated those, and we very much changed the way in which so many other parts of the industry are looking. So I think the short answer is yes, you can make a difference. And you look at individual localized examples that most of what I've described, I did as a backbench MP. It's not as a minister. And then large parts you can do as a minister. And so there's no doubt that, we bring together the 15 to 20 biggest players in areas of financial inclusion. I created the Money and Pension Service, for example. I'm the minister responsible for that. That deals with everything from debt to pensions dashboard, making savings more accessible, making pensions more accessible. So I think there is a huge amount that you can do on a local member of parliament or a ministerial basis. Is there a lot more to be done? Absolutely, without any shadow of a doubt. And I would welcome greater open banking, open pensions, both projects of which I'm completely behind. I'm massively trying to make pensions more simple, but also banking more simple. If we'd have had this conversation 10 years ago, no one had a banking app. No one would have had a savings app. Now, everyone speaks to their bank manager pretty much every single day. I am old enough and grey enough to have actually met my original bank manager at a meeting in a bank where this nice person sat me down and we had a conversation. But that was once every 3 to 4 years. Whereas if you have a banking app, you're having a conversation with your bank manager in reality virtually every other day. And the progress, in my view, will be when you get the interrelationship between your banking app, your savings app, and your pensions app, and you are moving your money across all those three, and you are having greater access to savings on an ongoing basis. I'll stop you there. I could go for about another half hour on this particular issue.
Well, you picked up on a couple of the themes I want to get further into. I mean, I think COVID, we saw a mass acceleration in the adoption of digital finance. You know, a lot of executives said they saw 3 to 4 years development in 18 months. And of course, you know, this was good in the sense that, you know, it allows people to be more engaged and more active with their finance, but it will also potentially have other knock-on effects. The banks for years have maintained large branch networks, which have been, you know, slowly closed down, you know, leaving some areas underserved with lack of access to cash or ability to pay in checks. So whilst, you know, digital adoption has been good for large parts of the economy, are you worried about the knock-on effects for financial inclusion, in particular the elderly, the vulnerable, the people who aren't comfortable using technology? And what are the solutions to this?
Well, I mean, I was in charge of the post office card account throughout COVID, and that provides savings and access to services for hundreds of thousands of people. We're also, you know, my constituency is the most rural and the most remote. It takes me 2 and a bit hours to drive across it. That's, you know, that's London to Swindon, to put it into context for everybody else. The practical reality is access to savings and banking facilities does matter. There's no doubt that people are getting much better at the tech and at data inclusion. But that having been said, we still need to do some work. So I recently met with the team from Link. I obviously know Natalie Seeney very well, and her work to try and ensure that there is access to cash on an ongoing basis, and that we're doing pragmatic and practical things. And the pilots that Treasury are running in this space, I think, are really very positive. And I'm going to go and see one of them very soon. But all the indications I get in terms of feedback on these pilots is very, very good. Now, it's a work in progress. I think as Sweden in particular has shown when they tried to go cashless, it's not necessarily the solution to all of your problems. And it has to be a mixed economy, doesn't it? And that has to be a increasingly technical and capable society. But at the same stage, I have 90-year-old residents who are not going to be doing online banking and online payments. And we need to navigate those residents through that. The best example I can give you is to compare it to pensions. So I'm a massive fan of the pensions dashboard. And as I just explained, making pensions financially accessible to everybody on their mobile phone, their iPad, or their computer at home. But you're still going to have written pension statements to my 88-year-old mum or my uncle, who are never, ever going to be going, you know, I'll look at my mobile phone to check my pensions dashboard and my pensions app and amalgamate and things those way. They want written documents. Now we are in that transition phase. When we get to, say, 20, 40, 50, today's 50-year-olds who are pretty technical savvy will be the ones who traditionally would be on paper. They won't be in that way. Clearly, it's a mixed economy, and we've got to balance that on an ongoing basis, whether that's access to cash or access to information, as best we possibly can do.
Exactly. And I just want to flip into a few other kind of topics as well, with looking more with your pensions hat on. I mean, one of the biggest stories for us at the moment at the FT is the run up to the COP conference, which is being hosted in the country. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about the government's work in trying to free up pension schemes so they're able to better fund the green agenda, because some of the numbers, you know, that are going to be required to fund a green transition are quite frankly staggering if we're to achieve the Paris goals over the next few years. So can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Well, I think there's two issues here. The first is that this country generally is on a journey. So, you know, you look at, in my space, the three key decisions, which are the decision by Theresa May to pass in Parliament net zero by 2050. Secondly, the decision to create and implement ESG reforms that have absolutely taken over all aspects of investing. And there's no question in my mind. I'm just back from Holland. I did a trip to France last year. there's no question the UK leads the world in ESG investing. No question. We understand it better than others, and we're implementing it better than others. And then, so I then made a decision in January of last year when we implemented and brought forward the TCFD regulations as part of the Pension Schemes Act. Again, we are the first country in the world to do it. No one else has put it on the statute book. And as of the 1st of October, we now have the regulations in place, which puts the consumer in charge, which requires schemes and asset managers to report back as to how they've invested. Now, the consequences of that, in my view, are an opportunity and a burden. So the burden is anytime you are first to regulate, you're first in market, that creates a burden that schemes are now having to do TCFD. They are now having to implement ESG reporting, which I get is complicated and is different from the old, I'm just going to do a FTSE tracker and happy days, and I'm not going to do any more work on this particular portfolio. But it is also an opportunity because one of the pluses of the Trump residency in the White House is that obviously the US didn't engage with climate change and climate change investing in a way that the UK has done and lots of other countries have done. So I see an opportunity for the City of London to lead the world. And when I speak to the BlackRocks and others, and when I speak to the individual asset managers, they really see the opportunity of proper asset management of portfolios with an ESG matrix and TCFD reporting. And that is really important because if I want to decide where I'm going to put my pension schemes, and I'm going to come to how we invest it and get to COP in a second, going to London as being the port of call who really understands it gives us a competitive first in market advantage. So I see it as an opportunity for City of London, and frankly, everyone I speak to sees it in that way as well. The ones who are not engaging with this are by and large out of a job. If not now, then they very shortly will be, because everybody is embracing this as the new normal.
It's a requirement.
So, yeah, of course, and it is, and rightly so. So, I mean, we've obviously brought in TCFD. I'm going to presume everybody understands that and understands the sort of mandatory reporting requirements. But you're also then beginning to see significant investment as a result of that. And I think that's the start of a great deal more. Whether you see the Nest commitments, obviously they put in 250 million into renewable projects. But I also see this as an opportunity because there is green tech out there that if you are the backers, whether it's through venture capital or whether it is through investment on a long-term basis of the future of hydrogen, of carbon capture and storage, of all of these other aspects, as part of a balanced portfolio, you'd still hold, as any stockbroker will tell you, a balanced portfolio of stocks and shares and bonds and gilts, etc. But if you are investing in the future of this country, clearly it is good for the country because of that investment is made in UK PLC. But more particularly, it is also investing in the potential future energy supplies, the energy sources, the middlemen who will be converting hydrogen into a practical application in fuel cells, the people who are actually then administrating carbon capture and storage from a principle into a reality into your home. Now, there's a lot of money to be made in that. There's no question whatsoever. And the country that is, again, first in market and takes the proprietary rates on those particular pieces of kit is definitely going to be the one that does well. And individual schemes are definitely investing in a very different type of portfolio. I give you an example. I've spent some time recently, it's all on my Twitter account for those who want to check it out, with Legal & General and seeing the way in which they are investing in the UK and other particular matters. So the long and the short of it is there is great opportunities out there. And I genuinely think that individual schemes and asset managers and their investment consultants are seeing those opportunities and taking them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know the other area which is linked to inclusivity and more responsible finance is stewardship. As pension minister, we have this enormous industry here in this country who are already a powerful voice, but have the potential to become a much more powerful voice, in the way companies are run, the decisions they make. But at the moment, how effectively and how often do you think they're using this power, and would you like to see more of it?
I think they're doing good, but they need to do a lot better. And those who aren't doing better need to be dismissed, frankly, by their pension schemes. So asset managers and pension scheme trustees have got to be way, way more involved in the companies they invest in. End of. We are, we're requiring to do that by reason of TCFD and ESG, but I've had very robust conversations with the likes of BlackRock and others to make sure they fully understand that it is my strong view that active management, active stewardship, action on pooled funds, voting has got to change. We need to, we hold huge shares in these very substantial companies. And we need to support them as well. And the stewardship is not just telling a company what to do. It is also supporting them on the path to net zero and providing the capital investment and shareholder support as they take that journey. So, the worst thing in the world, the biggest cowardice out there is divestment, in my humble opinion. And I want organizations to be embracing the challenge of getting to net zero and turning the likes of BP into a clean energy company. With, BP employs well over 50,000 people in this country. We value their jobs, we value their investment, we value their FTSE record, etc., etc. We want to turn that company into a clean energy company, and that requires support, but also active stewardship by pension scheme trustees and their asset managers, and in a whole host of different ways. But certainly, I've done a lot of work on the stewardship task force, on voting, on engagement, to make sure that people really, really understand that. And I think it is changing.
It is. From our perspective, we still see too many abstentions, too many companies not held properly to account by some of their big investors, who I think often just consider the chunks of shares they own to be sort of very hands-off, something they need to own via an index. So it would be good, to see more pressure applied on them.
I really think that's changing. Yeah, I'll tell you why I think it's changing. Is because we have empowered pension scheme trustees. And if they're not happy with the asset manager, and I don't care whether you're the biggest or the most best known asset manager, UK, French, American, whatever they are using in the UK, dismiss them. And it's an opportunity for those who do embrace this, in my view. So for the asset managers who have seen the writing on the wall, have seen the way in which the wind is blowing, the ones who say, give me your money, I will actively manage it, and I will actively engage in voting and do it in a responsible way. I'm not going to be driven by the 1% minority who shout the loudest. I'm going to be doing active stewardship to take all these companies and direct them and assist them and capitalize them, putting it bluntly, on their journey to clean energy companies. Because the other key thing to remember, divestment is a disaster and a complete act of cowardice. But the other thing to remember is it's not going to be my good colleague Kwasi Kwarteng or others who are going to be transformational in terms of creating clean hydrogen, new fuel cells, carbon capture and storage. That is going to come from business. And it's probably going to come from the energy businesses that are pre-existing. So we need to back them, support them, and navigate them through this journey. I'm just checking that we're in the middle of live votes. And no, we're okay. I think we're all right. I thought
that's great. Well, that signals a time for a question from the audience then. With your role in financial inclusion, there's been a lot of focus lately, both at the beginning of the year by regulators and more recently coming through companies changing their terms and conditions. Where do you stand on the buy now, pay later? I mean, it's really an area of finance that is exploding in the UK and elsewhere.
It's a matter entirely for Treasury and my good colleague John Glenn, who you should chat to him about that. It's entirely a Treasury policy.
Okay, understood. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the pensions, the pension scheme, and the government's Build Back agenda. I mean, we have, we've spoken before. I heard you speak before a lot about consolidation and the way to kind of marshal these funds. Can you give us kind of an update on that and how you're going to help drive that through?
So I think it's really simple. What is the best for members? What is the best for the country? And what is the best for regulators? So the best for members is the best possible outcomes at the best possible value. And I use the word value rather than price and cost. So in my view, there is pretty good evidence that with a few honourable exceptions, pretty much all schemes under 100 million are struggling to provide a good account of value to their members when compared to other schemes, particularly those who are larger, who could do, obviously, the economies of scales, potentially can attract different types of trustees, etc., etc. Now, my broad approach is big is better. We've given a opportunity for smaller schemes to prove that they are providing value for money. But I have spoken to my colleagues in Australia, and they would tell you very robustly that the ideal minimum value of a DC super fund would be 30 billion minimum. That's, which is way bigger than what we have at the present stage. And clearly we are on a journey because we're a few years behind, but the efficacy of such a fund has got to be much, much bigger than they presently are. So I've obviously done a piece of work that between 100 million and 5 billion. Now, clearly, that's been considered, and it is not right for me to sort of make policy on a live podcast. But the organisations who are concerned here, I would like a way smaller market, much more consolidated, with much greater buying power, with better trustees focused on the bigger players. And I think we are asking more of trustees, which also means that they need to have the opportunity to do it in a different way. So that's certainly, in terms of consolidation, I'm a massive believer in bigger is better. I suppose there are a number of other bits and bobs on that. The other bit I'm trying to look at in a lot of detail is what I would call value, and working with TPR and FCA to see to what extent the correct measurement of investments is a return as against a cost. And I think a wider definition of value is, in my view, the way ahead, particularly as the individual perception by the public becomes a lot more focused upon the outcome of their investment as opposed to a bare return. Now, it's easy for me to talk in broad terms about what is good value. You can go back to the Oscar Wilde that a cynic is somebody who knows the price of everything but the value of nothing. But at the same stage, regulating that much harder. But it's certainly the direction of travel is trying to provide a value for the members, which does include price, but also produces the right investment for the right member at the right time, producing the right long-term outcome. And that can't be just simple cost. I'll give you one particular example. If you and I accept, which I think most people do accept, that the defining issue of our age is getting to net zero by 2050, and if you accept that the most important thing about pensions is savings for the long term, if we don't get to net zero by 2050, then saving for the long term looks somewhat academic if you want your children and your grandchildren to have a prosperous and normal future. So it is an overriding concern that provides a real definition of value over and above this particular stock is returning me a 2, 3, 4% return on equity.
Yeah, and we're seeing real evidence that people actually care about this rather than just maximizing the returns these days, especially those saving for pensions now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very hard for then regulators to regulate this. So it's easy for us to say this is something we care about and or are doing X, Y, Z on. Very hard to define it. But I've begun that process. As to be fair, so is the FCA, so is the TPR. I hope that we will come together in 2022 to formulate ideas. At the same stage, for example, I've done a lot of work and I've done a consultation on the social element of ESG and what does that mean in real terms. Everyone can understand and appreciate what the environmental element is. Everyone can understand that governance in broad terms means diversity, women on boards, etc., all which is taken on board. It hasn't always been actioned as much as I'd like, but we know the direction of travel. But the social element of ESG is incredibly hard to define, and in my view, takes in way more than supply chains and also includes the value of the investment that you're making.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we're going to have to end it there and let you get back to your vote. But thank you for your time, Minister, today.
My pleasure.
And,
thank you for your time.
Keep up with the good work on financial inclusion in the UK.
Pleasure. Thanks very much for your time as well.
And to our audience, please stay tuned for the next session.